Thanks, Ben, and thanks everybody for your attention. It's really just personally really exciting to see Sarah's work coming to bear, because these are ideas we've been all kicking around as a community for a while, and some of those ideas were first talked about at the first one of these meetings. So it's fun to see them come to fruition, and obviously there's lots of room for improvement and lots more knowledge that we need to keep building on these approaches, but I think it's great to see them being applied to marine mammals and other top predators. So I'm gonna switch gears a little bit and take us from that very broad scale synthesis of many different threats to a little bit more focused case study where we can dive into mechanism a little bit more concretely. And we started this work really as a complement to some of the cumulative impact mapping work that our group had been doing, as a way to get more into the details of what's happening in a particular planning scenario. So the oceans, as background, the oceans, as we know, are becoming an increasingly crowded place with more and more human activities dependent upon them. And the direct and indirect interactions among those uses via the ecosystem really affect our ability to derive benefits from that ecosystem. So this is leading managers and scientists and policymakers to look to more comprehensive, multi-sectoral, ecosystem-based approaches to management, and also to engage in spatial planning for what should happen where. So some of the new uses that have been proposed, such as offshore energy facilities, are really bringing trade-offs to the forefront, both the intersectoral and the environmental trade-offs associated with different management decisions. So I'm going to talk today about some recent work that our group has been engaged in to try to quantify those trade-offs and help to reveal solutions that can mitigate them. And I want to acknowledge right now Crow White, who's on his back in the kelp forest in that picture on the far left, who was really the lead author of this work and the brains behind it and did all of the heavy lifting. So this is my tell you what I'm going to tell you slide, just so you know where we're headed with the message. So there are a lot of perceived conflicts and trade-offs in marine management. Probably many of you in the room have been involved in contentious debates. But some of those trade-offs are real, and some of them may not be. They may just be perceived. So I want to try to show you that quantifying trade-offs lets you actually reveal the conflicts that are true and move away from some of these polarizing debates where there's just a perceived conflict that in reality may not have to be as severe as the stakeholders engaged in the discussion believe it to be. We think that this framework also has merit because it can give everybody at the table a common language, a common currency with which to make decisions. And when I say a common currency, I don't mean dollars. So you'll see as we walk through this, you don't have to be able to put a dollar value on everything in order to have it considered within the same framework. The tools that we're using actually help you to find more efficient solutions, to try to, if they're there, identify the potential win-wins, and to mitigate those trade-offs and decrease the losses to sectors that might be being impacted by a new development. And finally, by walking through this exercise, we actually get some insight into what the value is to society of engaging in this much more complicated management exercise of coordinating multiple sectors and thinking about things at the ecosystem scale. So I want to walk you through a cartoon first that just illustrates some of these concepts, and hopefully it'll make some of the later graphs easier to understand. So imagine we have a situation where we're faced with permitting a new offshore energy facility. There's a perceived conflict with marine conservation. Maybe they're going to impact seafloor habitat, or there's going to be increased noise or pollution. So if we can consider these two things on the graph, where the axes represent value to these two sectors. It could be in any currency that you want. And we can plot a particular management outcome. So this might be one particular configuration of offshore energy development. And it has a certain value to the energy sector and a certain value or impact on marine conservation. then we might consider a different option. Well, this one has lower energy value, but it's got higher conservation value. So it's starting to look like there's a stark trade-off between these two sectors, right? But is there? We could consider a third management alternative that gets an improvement in value for both sectors, more energy produced and more conservation accomplished. And you can populate this graph with a whole universe of potential management configurations. For example, all of these might represent different densities and configurations of offshore energy infrastructure. And the best outcomes are going to be associated with management alternatives that get the most value for both of the sectors. And those are out here on this red line, out on the edge. The economists call this outer edge the efficiency frontier. And this is not a new idea by any means, but it is fairly new to be trying to apply this to marine management issues. So from a management perspective, this efficiency frontier, that's where you want to be. Any of the blue dots represent suboptimal management scenarios, because you could always be doing better for one or both sectors by moving up and to the right on this graph. And along the frontier, you have options, right? So where you want to be on it is going to depend on relative societal preferences for these two different sectors and the values to them. So here's an example from Steve Pulaski and his colleagues this is looking at land conservation and land use in the Willamette Valley in Oregon. So along the y-axis, they have biodiversity in terms of number of species, and on the x-axis, the economic value, the returns from different types of land use. And the actual pattern of land use in this valley is represented by I, the configuration that's in the middle of the plot. But there are lots of different potential mixes of land uses that you could be putting into place that would have both better economic returns and better returns for protecting species. Now, of course, changing patterns of land use at this scale isn't easy or instantaneous, but it shows you that there are gains to be had from shifting the way we're doing things in this situation. So I'm going to tell you about an example we worked on in Massachusetts. Massachusetts has been the epicenter in the U.S. around debate over offshore wind farms. It's been very controversial, as I'm sure you've heard. Offshore energy was really the main impetus in Massachusetts for passage of the Oceans Act in 2008, which impelled the state to develop a comprehensive ocean management plan, which was the first of its kind in the country. And that plan included, among other things, the identification of areas for different uses. So they included potential wind and energy areas, and I'm going to focus today on these three, on the provisional wind energy areas, and really our modeling efforts focus on the top two, P1 and P2. The plan also designated particular areas to protect species or vulnerable habitats, like this area off the Cape Cod National Seashore. And then the majority of the planning area was actually designated multiple use. So no new restrictions were put on it, and it's basically designated for multiple different human uses to occur. So fishermen, among other existing ocean users, have been really concerned about wind energy development, but mostly about preempting their important fishing areas. So we considered trade-offs with two iconic New England fisheries that have high cultural and economic value: the American lobster fishery and the winter flounder fishery. We also considered potential impacts on whale conservation and whale watching opportunities in the area, given the concentration of vulnerable whales in this area, including North Atlantic right whales, fin, humpback, and minke whales, and then the value of whale watching as a cultural and economic resource to the region. So offshore wind farms, as you probably know, represent the construction of these gigantic turbines in a matrix of the ocean. And we wanted to see if we could use a modeling framework to find the best possible wind farm configurations that would optimize value to the wind energy sector, but minimize conflicts with these existing sectors. So we built a dynamic bioeconomic model that's spatially explicit to look at the interactions among these different sectors and try to identify win-win possibilities. So I'll just quickly show you the interactions that are included. We consider trade-offs among the sectors across the whole 27-year lifespan of the facility, so the 2-year construction and 25 years of operation. And we try to capture all the important ecosystem and intersectoral dynamics within the case study region in this bioeconomic model. Undoubtedly, there are some simplifications that we have to make, and there are components that aren't included, but this is how we think about the interactions. So in these brackets, the first, the minus sign here represents the construction phase, and the 0 is for the operational phase. So during the construction phase, both whales and whale watching are probably going to be displaced from the area, so that's a negative impact. During the operation, we're not assuming any negative impacts on whales or whale watching. There may be some, but we couldn't get any experts to tell us that this is how you should quantify them. For wind energy and flounder fishing, there's a strong trade-off here because they're competing for the same soft bottom habitat. Where they want to put the turbines is also good habitat for flounder. For lobster, it's a little different because there will be a displacement of the fishermen during the construction period, but then once the turbines are in operation, you might see some potential benefit because they create a little bit of hard bottom at the base of the turbines, which might add lobster habitat. But they're also displacing fishing from right around those areas. And then finally, we included in the model a negative interaction between lobster fishing and whales because the herring that they use for bait in the lobster pot fishery in New England is really it's substantial. They're harvesting major amounts of biomass for bait, enough so that people have been able to actually document a population level effect that even trickles up to a decrease in whale watching opportunities in the area. So all of those pieces are built into the model, and I'll show you, try to walk quickly through some examples. So this is the pairwise trade-off between the lobster fishery and wind energy. We can compare particular proposals that might emerge from traditional management. Say the plan to just develop all of P1, that first provisional wind energy area that's farthest to the north. We can compare that to what you might select under strategic multi-sectoral planning. So here we've plotted, let me just walk you through the graph first. We've plotted on each axis the value to that sector as a proportion of the total potential value they could get out of those areas if they were the only sector there. So if wind energy could develop all of P1 and P2, that's their 100% value. If the lobster fishery could use all of the rocky habitat in P1 and P2, then that's pretty much their 100%. And then you just scale it to that. And that gives you a way to compare sectors that have really different total economic values, or ones where it's difficult to put a dollar value on it, say a conservation benefit or biodiversity, where it's very difficult to put a number, a dollar value on. So here we used a kind of optimization framework to search for the best solutions out on the frontier, those where you can't really do any better, maximizing value for the two sectors. And just a few of those, we looked at tens of thousands of possible configurations, and just a few of the best are plotted on that red line. And you can see that there's these represent options where you can minimize losses to the lobster fishery and maximize wind energy returns. So in this example, you might be able to get 25% more wind energy development, and with a price tag of something like $3 million additional profit, and while at the same time getting 3% less lobster impact. Now that's got a much smaller price tag, but it might be really meaningful to lobstermen working in that particular area, and then it has some trickle-down effects in terms of other industries that depend on the lobster fishery. So I'll show you some of the others. In order to quantify the value of coordinated marine spatial planning, we explicitly compared each efficiency frontier to the best case scenarios you'd get under single sector management, and that's that black line. So the red line is the efficiency frontier, the black line is best case scenario for single sector management. And there's the lobster and wind energy one that I just showed you with all the single sector best case scenarios plotted in black. Here's the whale watching and conservation and wind energy trade-off. If you try to avoid areas that are important for whales and for whale watching, then you can get more whale conservation and whale watching opportunities for the same amount of wind energy development. It makes sense. Or you could stay within a certain impact limit, say no more than a 5% decline in the value of the area to whales and whale watching, but still get more wind energy value. So, I can show you the last one. This is the flounder trade-off. This one is much more of a kind of classic eye for an eye sort of trade-off. The curves for single sector management and marine spatial planning are really close together. In fact, you have to blow them up to be able to see any difference between them. And this is because these two sectors are really competing for the same habitat, for this off bottom. So it looks like this is a case where you don't actually gain very much from engaging in the multi-sectoral management, but if you actually, I'm only showing you the pairwise trade-offs, but you can do the three-way and four-way trade-offs. You can add as many different axes to these as you want and go really cross-eyed trying to look at them, but when you do that exercise, that's when the flounder comes in actually, is if you're doing the three and four-way trade-off, then considering their habitat as part of that can get them some gains over what would happen if they weren't at the table, if they weren't being considered. So just to sum this up, I think the approach helps us solve a number of fundamental issues in ocean planning. First of all, it can show when and at what level there really are conflicts among sectors, steering us towards those real trade-offs and away from just the perceived contentious debate. It might not actually be that big of a problem when you get down to it. The tool can give decision makers and stakeholders a common language to weigh decisions once they've all agreed to be at the table in the first place. Then it gives you this common currency. And that first hurdle of getting everybody at the table, that you may never get over that. Like that could be really substantial. But if people buy into the marine spatial planning process, then this gives you a tool for considering everybody's values in the same framework, and it doesn't have to be in dollars. It actually lets you to identify better solutions and find particular configurations that can minimize losses to the incumbent sectors, and so it could be a useful planning tool, I think. And finally, it does really help us to see what's it worth to us as a society to engage in this, what could be a complicated process, how much bang for our buck could we get from it, and it gives you a way to actually go about trying to do that. So we hope that it will be useful. We're trying to continue to apply this model to different kinds of settings. We're looking at offshore aquaculture in Southern California now, and thinking about some other examples in other places too. So I'd be really eager for any input, feedback, questions, because this is definitely a work in progress. Oh, I should say though that this particular case study was published last March. Crow White is the lead author, and it came out in PNAS. So that's it. Thank you.
So I had kind of a visceral response, and I understand the process, and I followed the whole MPA drama where you've already got existing factors and existing communities interacting,
yeah.
But when you're introducing something that is completely foreign, that isn't tested, that you don't have this into a whole new environment that you know you're going to torque it and completely upset it, I don't know that you can adequately understand what's going to happen over time. You know? And I mean, we're not even saying we're going to put 2 of these out there and test it and see what happens. I mean, that like full launch, I don't understand how you can, when you're adding something new into an equation. I understand when you've already got other people, like you already have all these competing factors, we're trying to find a common ground. But I don't understand how you can put a quantifiable value to something that is an unknown?
Yeah, well, it's a great question, and I think it's one of the implicit assumptions of this is that you know enough about the mechanisms and the dynamics of the system to be able to make predictions about how things are going to play out. There are large offshore wind energy facilities in other parts of the world that we can begin to learn from, and a lot of the parameters in our model are derived from things that have been learned
with
in
a similar
Europe
ecosystem or a similar like as far as the sediment and the other creatures that are interacting, and I mean. Yeah,
pretty similar settings. I mean, obviously each place is unique, and there are going to be different things about it, and the confluence of marine mammals in this area, on Stelline Bank in Massachusetts Bay is pretty spectacular, and that may be different from the North Sea and other places where wind energy is really getting up and going. I think our goal in this effort was not to prescribe solutions to managers here, but to say, this is the kind of framework, this is the kind of tool that you could use, and let's push it as far as we can and see what we can learn from it, see if it's useful. But if you're going to really use it to make decisions about where exactly this should come, then you're going to need more information and more model development. So there are other impacts like on seabirds and things that aren't included in our model, which probably should be. Right. Other questions?
You said a couple of times that losses and gains of $500 million. How do you balance the dollars against the other stuff?
Let me just go back to one of these. On these plots, we're just looking at the decrease or increase in value as a proportion of the maximum potential value to that sector of the area. And you can put that in any, you can use any metric you want for your value. On that example I showed you from Steve Pulaski, they're plotting numbers of species against dollars. They could also have done that in terms of value and sorry, I'm getting feedback. I think this is a way to kind of help level the playing field, and you can, as long as you can figure out how to get your sector's interest into the modeling framework, then plotting the value is just a matter of making a proportion of the maximum potential. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's the idea. Yeah, back there.
I'd be concerned about using proportion of maximum because, like, wind energy, if they get 50% new energy, that's awesome for them. But like with our endangered species, like the right whale, if you have a 50% impact on them, that's terrible. So you have to be careful putting numbers on things because the different individuals involved are going to latch on to those numbers potentially without seeing the different weight or value to those same numbers.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good point. And you can incorporate into this limits or thresholds. If you are only, if the whale population can only tolerate a certain take, you could set that as a limit so that it, the space, the number of options that are available to you is then decreased. So you can bring in some of those more traditional frameworks for thinking about how to limit impacts and still use this to find the best possible solutions within that constrained space. And that's an area where we're actively working now to try to understand those important thresholds and tipping points in these systems and figure out how to apply a trade-off analysis like this within the context of those tipping points. So you stay within limits that are prescribed by the biology of the system and the values of society and the laws.